White Alpha King didn't want to mate with any woman until one albino Omega stepped forward. Towers of ice glinted like frozen fire beneath the weak winter sun, and the wind howled through the mountains like a warning. At the heart of this cold kingdom stood the palace of the White Alpha King, a fortress of frost and stone, as unforgiving as the man who ruled it. He was known across the lands for his unmatched strength, his sharp mind, and the icy command that brooked no opposition. No one dared challenge him, and few dared to approach him. The Alpha King had never taken a mate. He had turned away every woman who sought his favor, spurning marriages arranged by his advisors, ignoring the pleas of noble families. His heart, they said, was frozen. Some whispered that he had been betrayed long ago, though no one knew the full truth. His throne was secure, but his life was lonely, a kingdom ruled by fear and respect rather than love. The winter gathering was a tradition older than the kingdom itself. Once every year, nobles, warriors, and challengers came to the palace to present themselves to the Alpha King, hoping for recognition, alliance, or favor. The cold halls were filled with murmurs, footsteps, and the scent of fine perfumes and furs. Every year, women dressed in silks and jewels attempted to catch his gaze, to earn a smile or acknowledgement. Every year they failed. This year, however, something, or rather someone, was different. The doors of the main hall opened, and a pale figure stepped inside. Her skin was almost translucent, her hair like spun silver, and her eyes shone with a light that seemed untouched by fear. She moved with grace, but also with confidence, her small frame radiating a quiet strength. She was an Omega, but not the kind that begged for attention. She carried herself as though she belonged anywhere, even before the Alpha King. Courtiers whispered among themselves, "Who is she? She dares to enter alone." The bloodline, could it be true? But the Alpha King barely noticed their words. He sat upon his throne, draped in white furs that only enhanced his otherworldly presence, his eyes cold as winter ice. When the Omega approached the center of the hall, the murmurs faded. She stopped a few feet away, bowing only slightly, not in submission but in respect. Her gaze met his, unwavering. "I have come," she said, her voice clear and steady, "to offer myself if the Alpha King sees fit." The hall seemed to grow colder, though the fire in the torches did not falter. The Alpha King studied her carefully. Many had tried to impress him, to charm him with beauty, wit, or wealth. She offered none of those things, yet something about her presence struck a chord he could not name. "Why do you stand here alone?" he asked, his voice low, echoing in the stone hall. "Do you not fear what this place demands?" "I fear nothing," she replied, her eyes never leaving his. "I have traveled far, and I have seen the darkness that threatens more than one life. I am not here for favor. I am here because it is my choice, and because perhaps I am meant to stand before you." A tension settled between them, thick and heavy, like the snow-laden air outside. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King felt something stir in his chest, something unfamiliar. Respect, curiosity, desire. He could not tell. The gathering continued around them, but neither the nobles nor the advisors dared interrupt. The bond in that moment was silent, profound, as if time itself had paused. The Alpha King, who had never cared for any woman, found himself intrigued by this albino Omega who stood with such fearless grace. "You are bold," he said finally, "and perhaps foolish. Few survive the winter gathering without losing their wits or their life." "Perhaps," she said, "but I do not seek survival, I seek purpose. And if standing here before you is part of that purpose, then I will not retreat." A ripple of unease passed through the court. No woman had ever spoken to him like this, let alone without trembling before the throne. The Alpha King's expression, as always, was unreadable. But inside, something cracked, a sliver of curiosity, of longing, of recognition that she was not like the others. "You carry yourself well," he said after a long pause. "But tell me, why should I care for your choice? Her lips curved slightly in a smile, quiet and knowing. Because perhaps you do not realize what you have been missing. The Alpha King's hand tightened on the arm of his throne, the snow outside pressing against the palace walls as if nature itself listened to their exchange. He had ruled for decades, cold and untouchable, yet this Omega stirred something buried deep in his soul. Something dangerous, something that could shatter the armor he had built around his heart. "You speak as though you know me," he said. "Do you?" "I know enough," she said softly, "to understand that power is heavy, that solitude is a cage, and that even kings can need someone beside them if they dare to accept it." A silence fell. The court waited, breathless, sensing that a moment beyond politics, beyond tradition, was unfolding. The Alpha King leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing. He did not speak immediately, and the Omega did not move. They held the hall in a suspended pause, a moment both fragile and electric. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the torches in their sconces. "Many have sought my favor, many have failed. You are different, but difference is not enough to sway me. I do not take mates lightly. I do not ask for lightness," she said, stepping a little closer, her gaze unwavering. "I ask for truth, for honesty, for the choice that comes from the heart. I am not here to flatter you, nor to bend to your will. I am here because I believe there is something in you worth seeking." The Alpha King felt a tightness in his chest. No one had ever spoken to him with such courage, with such insight. His advisors had counseled caution. His instincts warned him to dismiss her. Yet as he looked at her standing unshaken before his throne, he realized that he had not felt this tension, this pull in many, many years. "What is your name?" he asked finally, his voice quieter than before. "Lyra," she said, her voice carrying a note of quiet strength. "And I am not afraid of you nor the path you walk." For a heartbeat, the Alpha King simply stared. Then, without warning, Lyra turned and walked toward the great doors of the hall. The court gasped, unsure whether she meant to leave. She paused, looking back at him over her shoulder. "I will wait," she said softly, almost a whisper. "Not for your command, not for your favor, but for the moment you see me as I am and choose." And then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of winter blooms and the echo of her words. The Alpha King rose from his throne, his mind racing, heart beating in ways he had thought impossible. The winter gathering ended, nobles dispersed, and the palace returned to silence, yet he could not forget her. Her courage, her grace, her fearless eyes, they haunted him. Alone in his chambers, he stood by the frost-lined window, staring into the endless white of the kingdom. The wind howled outside, yet inside his heart was louder, alive with something he could not name. For the first time he felt the stirrings of longing, of curiosity, of a desire that frightened him. He had always believed that strength meant solitude, that power meant detachment. But Lyra, she challenged that. And deep down, he knew that she would return. The night grew colder, the moonlight reflecting on the ice that surrounded the palace. The Alpha King, once untouchable and unfeeling, pressed a hand to the stone window and whispered a name no one else would hear. "Lyra." Outside, the snow continued to fall, endless and silent. And in the frozen kingdom of Werewolves, a seed had been planted, one that could thaw even the coldest heart. But even as he stood there, alone with his thoughts, he could not shake a single fear. That when she returned, everything he had built, everything he had believed about himself, might shatter under the force of what he felt. The morning after the winter gathering, the palace of Werewolves was quiet, though the wind still whispered through its frozen towers. The Alpha King, white-furred cloak draped over his shoulders, could not shake the image of Lyra. Her pale skin, silver hair, and fearless eyes haunted him. Every corner of the palace, every torchlit hall seemed empty without her presence, yet he knew that her absence was only temporary. She had promised to return, and he feared that when she did, his life, as rigid and ordered as the frozen walls around him, would unravel. He rode through the snow-covered streets, his white steed leaving a trail behind, cutting through the cold like a knife. The townspeople bowed from a distance, but he did not notice. His thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in images of her, her calm, unyielding gaze, the way she had spoken as though she knew him better than anyone else ever could. Reports had reached him that she was seen moving toward the eastern forests. These woods were known as the Whispering Pines, ancient and feared, home to spirits, curses, and hidden creatures. Many who ventured into the forest seeking adventure or fortune never returned. For the first time in decades, the Alpha King felt a pull not from duty or power but from something far more primal, a desire to know, to protect, to confront. He did not tell his advisors. No one needed to know. This was not a mission of strategy or politics. It was personal. He entered the Whispering Pines alone, the snow crunching beneath his boots, the shadows of twisted trees stretching long in the pale morning light. Lyra was already there. He found her standing near an ancient stone circle, her small frame outlined against the frost-covered ground. She was not afraid. She never had been. "Why do you follow me?" she asked softly, not turning to look at him immediately. "I do not know," he admitted, stopping a few paces away. "I do not usually concern myself with any woman, but you are not like the others." She turned, and their eyes met. In the forest's quiet, it was as if the world had shrunk to only the two of them. The Alpha King saw something deeper in her gaze than mere courage. He saw understanding, judgment, and a calm strength that seemed impossible for one so young. "I told you," she said. "I came because it was my choice. I am not here to seek your favor or your protection. I am here because it matters, because it is part of what I must do." He frowned. "And what is it that you must do, Lyra? What danger pulls you into the forest alone?" "There are forces," she said quietly, "that even the Alpha King may not fully comprehend. Creatures bound to old magic, spirits that linger, and curses that can twist the mind of even the strongest. I cannot fight them alone, but I also cannot leave them unchecked. If they grow in power, your kingdom will suffer." The Alpha King stepped closer, the wind whipping his cloak around him. "And you think I should care?" "You already care," she said simply, her words like ice against his chest. "That is why you follow me." He wanted to argue, to maintain the walls he had built around his heart, but he could not. Something in her presence commanded him. It was not fear, not duty, it was recognition. She understood him in ways no one else ever had. They moved deeper into the forest. The trees grew taller, more twisted, and the shadows darker. Spirits whispered on the wind, voices soft yet chilling, as if the forest itself spoke warnings. Lyra moved with ease, her steps certain, as if she had walked this path before. The Alpha King followed, his senses alert. Every shadow could hide danger, every rustle of snow could mean an attack. Hours passed. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of frost and twisted wood. Then a low growl echoed through the trees. From the shadows, a creature emerged, larger than a wolf, with eyes that glowed like molten gold and fur black as night. Its teeth gleamed, and it moved with unnatural speed. Lyra did not flinch. She stepped forward, arms open, as if to speak to the creature. The Alpha King tensed, ready to strike, but she raised a hand. "Stay back," she said calmly. "It will not harm us if we do not show fear." The creature paused, tilting its head as if listening. Then, to the Alpha King's shock, it backed away slowly, disappearing into the shadows. You controlled it," he said, astonished. "No," Lyra said. "I did not. I only respected it. Fear weakens, but courage, true courage, commands." The Alpha King studied her, a mixture of awe and disbelief twisting his chest. He had ruled with strength and fear all his life, yet here she was, teaching him lessons he never thought he needed. They continued their journey, and soon they reached an ancient ruin hidden beneath the snow. Pillars of ice rose like frozen giants, and in the center of the courtyard lay a stone altar, inscribed with symbols older than the kingdom itself. "This is why I came," Lyra said, her voice reverent. "There is magic here that is dangerous if left unchecked. It can twist the hearts of men, fill them with greed and cruelty. I intend to seal it before it spreads." The Alpha King frowned. "And you think this magic can be controlled by you?" "I do not think," she said. "I know, but I cannot do it alone." He studied her closely. She was small, fragile even by the standards of the Omega, yet her presence was commanding. Her courage, her resolve, and her purity of purpose were unlike anything he had ever encountered. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he stepped forward to stand beside her. Together, they approached the altar. The air grew colder, the whispers of the forest more urgent. Shadows twisted, forming shapes of creatures long dead or imagined, testing them, challenging their courage. The Alpha King felt a tension unlike any battle he had faced. This was not physical strength alone, but a trial of the mind and heart. Lyra placed her hands on the altar, whispering words in a language older than the mountains. The Alpha King felt a pulse of energy, cold and sharp, rush through the courtyard. The shadows recoiled, screeching in soundless fury, then vanished. The forest was silent once more. Snow fell softly as if nothing had happened, but both of them knew the danger had not ended. It had only been contained for a time. The Alpha King turned to Lyra, seeing her in a new light. Fearless, determined, unyielding, and yet there was something delicate, almost vulnerable beneath her strength. He had always believed that power required isolation, but now he understood that courage and loyalty, when combined, could be more potent than any army. "Why do you risk yourself?" he asked quietly. "Why put yourself in danger for a kingdom that barely knows you?" Lyra met his gaze steadily. "Because the world is larger than one person, even a king. Because I cannot stand by while darkness grows. And because, sometimes, even the strongest need someone who dares to stand beside them." For a moment the Alpha King said nothing. His heart, long frozen, ached with something he could not name. Desire, respect. Perhaps both and something more. A recognition that she challenged him in ways he had never experienced. The wind howled again, carrying the scent of snow and ice, and Lyra looked at him, a small, knowing smile playing at her lips. "Do you see now why I came?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I see. But understand this, Lyra, if you are to stand beside me, you will need more than courage. You will need patience and strength, for the path ahead is darker than even these woods." "I am ready," she said simply. And in that moment, a bond formed, not of command, not of duty, but of choice. A silent promise that neither had fully acknowledged, but both understood. As they made their way back through the forest, a distant howl echoed through the trees. It was not animal, not spirit, but something else, ancient, relentless, and aware. The Alpha King's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, and Lyra's gaze hardened. "This is only the beginning," she said quietly. The Alpha King's eyes met hers. For the first time in decades, he felt a spark of warmth against the cold fortress of his heart. And he knew, without doubt, that the path ahead would change everything, for him, for her, and for the kingdom of Werewolves. The snow fell harder, blanketing the world in white, but neither of them looked away. Together they would face whatever darkness lay ahead, but the question lingered in the icy air. Would the Alpha King's heart, long untouched and unyielding, be able to withstand the storm that Lyra had awakened? And far beyond the forest, hidden eyes watched, waiting, as if the world itself held its breath for the events yet to unfold. The palace of Werewolves had grown colder in the weeks following the winter gathering. Snow piled high against the gates, and the wind cut through the halls with icy fingers. Yet inside, the Alpha King felt a warmth he had not known for years, a spark ignited by Lyra, the albino Omega who had dared to step into his life. Still, that warmth was accompanied by tension, a mixture of longing and fear. He had ruled with certainty for decades, but Lyra challenged him in ways he could not predict. Lyra had returned to the palace as she had promised, unbowed and determined. She did not come seeking favor, nor did she bend to the authority of the throne. Instead, she walked through the halls as if she belonged there, her pale presence both fragile and commanding. The Alpha King watched her from a distance, curious, cautious, and unwilling to admit the depth of his fascination. "You move as though you own these halls," he said quietly when he finally confronted her in the courtyard. Snowflakes clung to his fur cloak and his eyes, cold as ice, searched hers. "I move as I must," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "The palace is your home, yes, but it is also part of the kingdom I aim to protect." He frowned, unused to such words. None of his advisors, none of the noble women who had sought him, had ever spoken with such certainty or authority. There was no flattery in her tone, no attempt to sway him with charm or wit. It was pure, unyielding, and that unnerved him. "You speak as though you know the dangers better than I do," he said. "Yet you are small, untested by the trials of rule." Lyra stepped closer, tilting her head slightly, unafraid. "Strength is not measured in size or command, Alpha King. Courage is not bound to a throne. I have faced things you cannot imagine, and I survived. I will survive here too, if I must." For a moment, he saw her not as an Omega, not as someone who dared to challenge him, but as a force of nature, white and pure, yet untamable. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of frost and pine, and he realized he had never been so aware of a human presence, never felt so drawn, so unsettled by another. "You are bold," he said finally, "perhaps too bold for your own good." "And perhaps not bold enough," she countered, her gaze steady. "You do not see the world as it is, only as you wish it to be. You rule with strength, yes, but also with walls that keep everything you fear at bay. I am here to show you that some walls must fall if the world is to survive." He felt a tug in his chest, a pull he could not resist. He wanted to question her further, to test her resolve, but a sudden commotion interrupted them. From the shadowed towers a cry rang out, a warning sharp and urgent. The Alpha King drew his sword instinctively, his eyes narrowing. Lyra's hand went to the dagger at her waist, though she did not seem afraid. They ran toward the source of the sound, their steps swift on the icy stone. In the courtyard below, shadows moved unnaturally. Figures of black mist swirled together, forming shapes that were neither human nor animal. The curse that had lingered in the forest had followed them to the palace. The creatures were drawn to the palace's power, to the energy that Lyra had begun to awaken within the kingdom. The Alpha King raised his sword, the metal catching the faint light of torches. "Stay behind me," he commanded, though the words felt hollow. Lyra did not move. "I do not hide," she said calmly. "If we face this together, we can end it faster." The creatures lunged, their forms shifting like smoke. The Alpha King met them with swift precision, his sword slicing through the dark mist. Lyra moved with agility and skill, her dagger flashing like silver fire. Together, they were a force, moving in perfect synchrony without words, instinct guiding them as much as strategy. Despite the danger, the Alpha King could not stop noticing her. The way she remained calm under pressure, how her eyes reflected the pale moonlight even in the shadow of attack, and how, when she moved close, a strange warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with physical proximity. As the last of the mist creatures dissipated, a silence fell over the courtyard. The torches flickered in the icy wind, casting long shadows across the snow. Lyra straightened, breathing steadily, though her eyes shone with the thrill of danger. "You are unlike any I have ever known," the Alpha King admitted quietly, sheathing his sword. "And you are unlike any I have met," she replied. "You rule with strength, yet you fear something more, something you have not faced." He studied her, the tension between them thickening. It was not desire in the simple sense. It was more complicated, an intertwining of respect, fear, fascination, and the slow, inevitable pull of something deeper. He had never allowed himself to feel like this. No one had ever stood before him unafraid, unyielding, and undeterred. And now, he did not know if he could ever turn away. The night deepened, and the Alpha King led her to a smaller tower, one that overlooked the kingdom. Snow swirled below, and the pale moonlight reflected off the ice like a silver sea. "Tell me," he said, voice quiet, "why you risk yourself so freely, why you walk into danger without hesitation." Lyra looked out over the kingdom, her silver hair catching the moonlight. "Because someone must," she said softly. "Someone must stand against the darkness that creeps unseen, and because I believe that you, even with all your power, cannot face it alone." Her words struck him in a way that no battle, no victory, no crown ever had. He felt a fissure in his armor, the walls around his heart trembling. And for the first time, he admitted, if only to himself, that perhaps he did not want to face the world alone either. A soft sound behind them drew his attention. One of the palace guards had entered, bowing low. "Alpha King, there is news from the Eastern Tower. A new shadow has been seen. It moves faster than any we have encountered." The Alpha King's jaw tightened. "Then we leave at once." Lyra stepped beside him, her presence a comfort and a challenge all at once. "Do not act without thought," she warned. "We must be careful. Power alone will not save us." He nodded, though the tension in his body did not ease. He had never worked with another in this way, never trusted another to share the fight. And yet, side by side with Lyra, he felt something new, a sense of balance, a rhythm between them that neither had expected. They moved toward the Eastern Tower, snow crunching beneath their boots, the wind howling around them. Shadows shifted in the forest beyond the palace walls, and the Alpha King's grip on his sword tightened. He sensed that these were no ordinary enemies. They were drawn by something ancient, something connected to the bloodlines of both his family and hers. Lyra glanced at him, eyes steady. "Whatever comes, we face it together. Do you understand?" He looked at her, seeing not only courage but a kind of fierce loyalty he had never encountered. "Together," he said simply. As they approached the tower, the air grew colder, heavier, and darker. Shapes moved in the shadows, faster, larger, and more threatening than the previous mist creatures. Their eyes glowed with unnatural light, and the Alpha King felt a weight in his chest, as if the air itself carried menace. "Stay close," he said, sword ready. "They will test us. They will try to separate us." "I will not leave your side," Lyra said quietly, almost a promise. The creatures lunged from the shadows, swirling like living smoke. This time they were more aggressive, more intelligent, as if they had learned from the first attack. The Alpha King fought with precision, his sword cutting through the black mist, while Lyra darted through the gaps, striking with deadly accuracy. Yet, for every shadow they destroyed, two more seemed to appear. It was a relentless assault, a test of their endurance, courage, and trust. The Alpha King realized that this was not just a fight of strength, it was a trial of connection. Only by moving as one, anticipating each other, could they survive. Hours seemed to pass in the flurry of battle, until at last, the last of the shadows dissipated with a shriek that echoed through the frozen night. Both stood, panting, their breaths visible in the cold air. The Eastern Tower loomed above them, intact but scarred by the encounter. The Alpha King lowered his sword, eyes fixed on Lyra. "You were incredible," he said, his voice rough from exertion and emotion. "And you were not far behind," she said, a small smile gracing her lips. "But this is only the beginning. The forest, the kingdom, even the palace itself will face more. We must be ready." He nodded slowly, but his gaze lingered on her. "I did not expect this," he admitted. "You challenge me, and yet I cannot imagine standing without you." Lyra's smile deepened, faint and knowing. "Then perhaps the world is not as lonely as you believed, Alpha King." The wind howled again, carrying the scent of snow and ice. Somewhere beyond the walls, unseen eyes watched. Forces older than the kingdom stirred, and the Alpha King realized that the darkness they had begun to confront was far larger than either of them could yet imagine. And yet, as he looked at Lyra, standing fearless beside him, He felt a warmth that could defy the coldest shadow. For the first time in his life, he understood that strength alone did not make a king. Courage, trust, and perhaps even love were equally powerful, and that the bond forming between them could shape the fate of Verales itself. But as the first flakes of a new storm began to fall, he could not shake a growing unease. The shadows had only retreated, not vanished, and the forces they had awakened were patient, relentless, and ancient. Lyra's hand brushed against his sleeve, a quiet reminder that they were not alone. Together they would face the storm, but even side by side, the coming trials promised to test everything, their courage, their trust, and the fragile connection growing between them. The storm raged across the kingdom of Verales like a living thing. Snow fell in thick sheets, whipping against the walls of the palace and freezing every stone in sight. The wind screamed through the towers as though the kingdom itself was crying out, warning of danger that had come at last. Within the palace, the Alpha King stood at the highest tower, his white cloak heavy with snow, his sword gripped tightly. Beside him, Lyra's pale form was steady, unflinching, her silver hair swirling around her in the fierce wind. "This storm," he said, voice low, "it feels alive." Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the palace walls. "It is alive. The forces we disturbed in the forest, they are coming. They are ancient, patient, and relentless. They will not stop until the kingdom falls or we stand against them." The Alpha King's jaw tightened. "Then we will face them, together." For the first time in years, he did not speak as a ruler commanding subjects, nor as a warrior seeking victory. He spoke as a man who understood that some battles could not be fought alone. Lyra met his gaze, and without words, they both understood the truth. This fight would test not only their strength, but the bond that had grown between them. The shadows descended from the forest, larger and darker than anything they had faced before. Shapes twisted like smoke, eyes glowing with a strange, unnatural light. The creatures moved as one, flowing forward in waves of darkness, as though the storm itself had given them form. The Alpha King stepped forward, sword raised and Lyra at his side. "Stay close," he commanded, voice steady despite the fear that stirred within him. "I will not leave you," she replied simply. The first wave of shadows struck. The air was filled with the hiss of cold wind and the clash of steel. The Alpha King moved with precision, each swing of his sword cutting through the darkness, while Lyra's dagger struck with speed and grace. Together, they formed a rhythm, two halves of a single force. The storm seemed to rage against them, yet their determination did not falter. Hours passed in a blur of motion and snow. Every shadow destroyed was replaced by another. The creatures were relentless, testing not only their skill but their endurance, their courage, and their trust in one another. The Alpha King realized that for all his strength, he could not have survived without Lyra by his side. She was not merely an ally, she was the balance he had needed, the spark that could ignite even the coldest heart. At last, the storm seemed to pause, as if it were considering its next move. A single figure emerged from the shadows, taller and darker than the rest. Its eyes glowed with golden fire, and the Alpha King felt a weight in his chest that went beyond fear. This was no ordinary enemy. It was the embodiment of the curse, the darkness that had lingered over the kingdom for generations. Lyra stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on the Alpha King's arm. "Together," she whispered. He nodded, and side by side they faced the towering figure. The Alpha King struck first, his sword slicing through the air, but the figure seemed untouchable. Every blow he landed passed through shadows, meeting resistance that was not physical but magical. Lyra moved with him, her dagger flashing, her voice whispering words of old power she had learned in the forest. "You cannot fight this alone," she said, her eyes meeting his. "You must let me stand beside you, not just in battle but in choice. Trust me." The Alpha King hesitated, a flinch he could not hide. All his life he had relied on strength alone. To trust, truly trust, was a lesson he had never learned. Yet looking at Lyra, seeing the courage in her gaze, he understood. He was not alone. He had never been alone. He lowered his sword slightly, placing a hand over hers. The gesture was small, but it carried a weight far greater than any weapon. Together, they channeled their energy, combining his strength with her courage and her knowledge of the ancient powers that had lingered in the kingdom. Light flared between them, bright as moonlight reflecting off ice, and the shadows shrieked, recoiling from the force of their union. The figure stumbled, twisting in rage and fear, as if the bond between Alpha King and Omega burned hotter than any blade. The storm itself seemed to respond, swirling violently around them, yet they stood firm, hearts synchronized, wills united. "Now!" Lyra cried, her voice carrying through the howling wind. With a final, united strike, the Alpha King and Lyra sent a pulse of energy through the darkness. The shadow shrieked one last time before dissipating into the storm, leaving only snow and silence. The wind slowed, the storm began to calm, and the kingdom lay beneath a blanket of quiet snow once more. The Alpha King lowered his sword, breathing heavily. Lyra's hands were icy but steady, and her eyes shone with relief and pride. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at one another, the bond forged in battle stronger than anything either had expected. "You saved me," he said quietly, though the words felt incomplete. "No," she replied softly, stepping closer. "We saved each other." He studied her face, pale in the moonlight, hair silver against the dark sky, and realized that the feelings he had tried to deny were now undeniable. Courage, trust, respect, and something far deeper, the warmth of connection he had thought impossible, flooded through him. "You," he began, then paused, unsure how to voice what he felt. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known. I do not know how to thank you." Lyra smiled, a faint, knowing curve of her lips. "No thanks are needed. We stand together because we choose to, not because we must. That is more than enough." The Alpha King took a step closer, the cold wind swirling around them, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel something beyond duty or power. He allowed himself to acknowledge that his heart, long encased in ice, had begun to thaw. "I was alone," he said quietly, "for longer than I can remember. I ruled with strength, with fear, and with certainty. But you have changed that, and I do not want to return to the cold I knew before." Lyra reached out, placing her hand over his. "Then do not," she said simply. "Walk forward with me, face whatever comes, not alone but together." The Alpha King nodded, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "Together," he echoed. The snow around them seemed to shimmer in approval, or perhaps it was simply the light of the moon catching the ice in a new way. The kingdom, though battered by the storm and the shadows, was still standing. And for the first time, the Alpha King understood that power alone did not protect a kingdom. Connection, trust, and courage did. They descended from the tower together, side by side, their steps in rhythm, their presence a statement to all who watched from shadows. The Alpha King and the Omega were no longer alone. Together they had faced the darkness, and together they had emerged stronger. In the days that followed, the palace slowly returned to calm. Snow still fell, but it was peaceful now, a gentle reminder of the trials they had survived. Lyra moved through the halls with quiet grace, and the Alpha King found himself seeking her presence more often than he expected. Not as a king seeking an ally, but as a man recognizing the value of connection, trust, and the courage it took to love. One evening, as the moonlight reflected off the icy courtyard, the Alpha King turned to Lyra. "You changed everything," he said softly. "And you allowed it," she replied, her gaze steady. "That is how change begins." For the first time in years, he did not hide his heart, nor did he retreat behind walls of frost. He took her hand in his, and in that simple touch, he felt the completion of something he had long denied. The courage to trust, to care, and to embrace what he had once thought impossible. "Lyra," he said, his voice carrying through the quiet courtyard, "you are mine and I am yours, not by duty, not by prophecy, but by choice." A smile spread across her face, soft and genuine. "Then let us walk forward together," she said. "Whatever comes, whatever darkness may rise, we will face it as one." The wind softened, carrying the scent of pine and frost. The kingdom of Verales, once ruled by fear and cold, had found warmth in the bond of two who had chosen each other. And while the future would hold trials, both known and unknown, the Alpha King and Lyra knew one truth. Together, they could face anything. Above, the moon shone pale and steady, casting silver light over the frozen towers. The storm had passed, but it left behind something far greater than calm. Hope, connection, and the promise of a future built not on fear or duty, but on trust, courage, and the quiet power of hearts united. And somewhere in the distance, the forest whispered, as though acknowledging the bond that had been forged, waiting to see how the strength of their unity would shape the kingdom in the years to come.